At 8:12. That morning, my sister texted me one line that ended 15 years of family peace. "I'm quitting my job. You'll take care of us while I figure things out. No greeting, no guilt, just expectation." I wiped my hands, stared at the message, and typed 4 words I'd never said before. "That's not on me." Then I opened my laptop and signed the overseas contract waiting in my inbox. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up again, Mom. But what she wrote next didn't just test my patience. It forced me to choose between blood and freedom. Before we dive in, hit like and tell me, have you ever been the responsible one who finally said no? When people say family keeps you grounded, they don't mention how heavy the ground can feel when you're the one holding everyone up. I've always been that person. Emma Pierce, 32 operations manager, the human equivalent of a spreadsheet. My parents called me the stable one. What they meant was the one who never says no. Our family dinners looked warm from the outside, a roast in the oven, football humming from the living room candles, flickering against framed photos of vacations we couldn't afford without my credit card. But beneath the calm, everything was measured: my time, my paycheck, my patience. Mom would pass the bread and say, "You know, your sister's creative spirit just needs support right now." Translation. Jenna's latest failed dream had a new invoice attached. Dad would grunt from behind his beer. Emma grabbed the check, "Will you?" as if it were tradition, carved in stone. And Jenna Hare, perfectly undone voice, syrup sweet, would smile like she'd earned another subsidy. I'd sit there pretending the math didn't sting the rent. I quietly covered the insurance. I paid the vet bills for her dog I never met. My phone was full of reminders labeled family bills, a list that used to make me proud. It meant I was useful, dependable, the glue. But lately, that glue felt more like handcuffs. Mom liked to say, "Family evens out in the end." She never saw that even meant I bled a little more every time someone else made a mess. I'd tell myself it was temporary, that Jenna would finally get her act together. But she never did, and somehow I was always the safety net. Even Mike, my boyfriend, patient and kind, had started to notice. "You know they don't love you because you fix everything right," he'd said once. "They love you because it's convenient." I'd laughed it off, but his words stuck quiet and sharp. The last Sunday dinner I went to, I remembered Jenna breezing in 20 minutes late wearing an outfit that cost more than my week's groceries. Mom hugged her like she'd returned from war. "You've had such a hard week," she cooed. I poured the wine, pretending not to hear. Later, when Mom leaned close and said, "You're lucky, Emma. You don't need anyone to take care of you." I smiled the way people do when they're swallowing fire. That night, I opened my notes app and scrolled through the debts again, each entry a little confession I'd never made out loud. The list went on: phone plan, utilities, car insurance, apartment deposit. It wasn't just money. It was proof of how far I'd go to keep the peace. I didn't know it then, but peace was exactly what I was about to lose and somehow finally gain. It started small, like all cracks do. A late payment here, a "can you just spot me till next month" there. But by that fall, every favor had turned into a standing order. My family didn't even ask anymore, they expected. Then came the morning Jenna announced she'd quit her job. She made it sound poetic, like a declaration of self-love. "It was toxic," she said at dinner, stabbing her mashed potatoes like a martyr. "I'm focusing on my mental health." Mom clasped her hands, eyes shining. "That's so brave, sweetheart." I stared at my plate. When I'd taken a single sick day last year, Mom said I was being dramatic. Jenna's boyfriend, Caleb, grinned across the table. "She's building a brand, something creative." Dad nodded proud. "Faith, that's what matters." I wanted to ask if Faith could pay rent, but I bit my tongue. After dinner, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Honey, Jenna's going through a hard time," she whispered, like it was breaking news. "She just needs a little runway." "You understand." I did understand. That runway was paved with my paychecks. That night back in my apartment, I sat in the dark with only the hum of the fridge for company. My notes app was open: payments, bills, insurance, deposits. I scrolled through the numbers until they blurred. It wasn't a ledger anymore. It was a map of my own exhaustion. 2 weeks later, the text came, the same one that cracked everything wide open. 8:12 a.m. The morning light was soft, harmless. My phone buzzed on the counter. I'm quitting my job, you'll take care of us while I figure things out. No greeting, no guilt, just assumption. I stared at it for a long time, toothbrush still in my mouth. For years, my instinct had been to fix, to send money, to smooth over the chaos. But something in me shifted. Maybe it was Mike's voice echoing in my head, "You've been paying for permission to be loved." I wiped my hands, opened the message, and typed 4 words. "That's not on me." My fingers trembled as I hit send. It felt like pushing a button that could blow up the only bridge I'd ever known. Silence. No reply. Just the faint hum of the bathroom fan and my own heartbeat. I walked into the living room, still half stunned. On my laptop screen was the Dublin contract I'd been too afraid to sign. I hovered over it. For months, I'd made excuses. Mom would panic, Jenna would crumble, Dad would guilt-trip me. But not this time. The moment I pressed sign, a tiny notification blinked, "Document completed." It was quiet, almost anticlimactic, but I felt something unclench deep inside me. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up again, Mom. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at her name glowing against the screen, and I swear the air shifted. Whatever came next, I already knew it wouldn't be love. It would be the price tag for saying no. Mom's text came exactly 10 minutes later, like clockwork. "If you won't help your sister, don't come to Thanksgiving." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. For years, those words would have crushed me. Not because I cared about the turkey or the small talk, but because exclusion meant guilt, and guilt was how they kept me in orbit. But this time I laughed, softly, almost in disbelief. "That's supposed to scare me," I whispered to no one. "But it feels like freedom." I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and looked at the contract confirmation still glowing from earlier Dublin. Housing included. Start date, Monday. It felt like a life I'd only daydreamed about now, quietly waiting for me to choose it. For the first time, I realized my family didn't just drain my bank account, they drained my ability to imagine life without them. That was about to change. I opened another tab, my online banking. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but focus. One by one, I scrolled through the recurring payments I'd carried for years. The family phone plan, Jenna's car insurance, utilities tied to my parents' house. Cancel, remove, deactivate. Each click was small but seismic. I half expected lightning to strike or Mom to burst through the door. Instead, there was only silence. Clean, almost peaceful. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail from Aunt Rose. "This time, sweetheart family gives and receives. Maybe you can give a little more this season. God will bless you back tenfold. Delete." Mike called later that night. His voice was warm, steady. "You did it, didn't you?" "I think so," I said. I finally said no. "You didn't say no," he corrected gently. "You said yes to yourself. That line stuck." After we hung up, I started a new document labeled Exit Plan. I typed it in bold. Underneath, I listed every step like instructions for survival. Remove my name from their phone plan, unlink Jenna's car insurance, cancel utilities at the parents' house, freeze shared credit lines, transfer savings to a new account. Each line tightened a knot I hadn't realized was still loose. When I finished, I sat back and exhaled. For the first time in years, my life didn't look like a to-do list written for someone else. Still, the old habits tugged at me. I kept checking my phone, expecting Mom to call, expecting an apology that never came. By midnight, 23 unread messages blinked on my screen. None of them said, "I'm proud of you." Most said some version of, "You'll regret this." Maybe I would, but regret at least would finally belong to me. As I shut my laptop, the Dublin contract notification blinked again, a reminder. Flight confirmed. 5 days. I whispered it out loud, testing the sound. 5 days till freedom. Mom didn't wait long to escalate. By the next morning, my phone was a war zone. Group texts, missed calls, guilt dripping from every message. "Mom family meeting tonight. Dad, we expect you here at 7. Jenna." Don't make this harder than it already is. It was astonishing how fast they could turn "please help" into "how dare you." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing the simplest answer of my life. "I won't be there." Almost instantly, the typing bubbles appeared. "Mom, you will. Jenna, you're unbelievable. Dad, Watch your tone. I silenced the chat and turned my phone face down. The quiet felt holy. At 6:52 p.m., the doorbell rang anyway. When I checked the peephole, Dad stood there still in his work shirt, jaw tight. "Open the door, Emma." "No, don't play games, I'm not." He muttered something under his breath about disrespect, but I didn't move. Finally, the footsteps faded down the hall. I locked the deadbolt twice, leaned against the door, and let out a shaky breath. They weren't coming to talk. They were coming to win. The next day, Mom tried a softer weapon. A voicemail, her tone sugar-coated and trembling. "Sweetheart, Jenna's trying her best. She needs a little support just this once. Think about what family means." I deleted it halfway through. By evening, I got a FaceTime call. The family conference. I almost didn't answer, but part of me wanted to see their faces, wanted to finally stop pretending. When the screen lit up, all three were there. Mom in the kitchen, Dad at the head of the table, Jenna beside her, with swollen eyes and perfect lighting. Caleb hovered in the background, pretending to fix something on his phone. Emma, Mom, started softly, "Can we please talk like adults?" "I thought that's what I've been doing," I said. Jenna jumped in. "You embarrassed us. You made me look like a beggar. I didn't make you anything," I replied. "You sent a demand, and I declined." Her lips trembled. "You don't believe in me. You never have." That one stung, not because it was true, but because it used to work. "Jenna," I said carefully, "belief isn't a bank loan." Caleb chuckled low and condescending. "She's so uptight. No wonder you're single half the year." My voice didn't rise. "Caleb, do you even hear yourself?" He smirked. "Just a joke." Mom cut in sharply. "Enough. Emma, your sister's business could change her life. She just needs someone responsible on paper." Dad leaned forward, hands clasped. "It's not even risky. It's a small loan, $150 tops. You'll co-sign, that's all." "That's all," I repeated, letting the words sink in. "You're asking me to guarantee a $150,000 loan for someone who quit her job last week." Mom's voice hardened. "Don't be dramatic. We raised you better than this." I felt something snap, not anger, just clarity. "You didn't raise me to say yes. You raised me to survive saying no." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Dad's face flushed. "Watch your tone." "I am," I said evenly. "It's calm." Mom's eyes narrowed. "So that's it. You're walking away from your family. I'm walking away from being your financial plan." Jenna started crying, mascara pooling at the corners of her eyes. "You're punishing me for being different. I'm setting boundaries," I said. "There's a difference." Mom slammed her hand on the table. "You'll regret this, Emma." I nodded once. "Maybe, but I'll regret it on my own dime." I ended the call. Seconds later, the group chat exploded, paragraphs from Mom threats, from Dad emojis, from Aunt Rose. One message from Jenna: "You destroyed this family." I didn't reply. I turned off notifications, opened my exit plan, and started checking boxes. Removed from phone plan, unlinked insurance, canceled utilities, closed shared credit line. Each completed task felt cleaner than the last. By midnight, 43 missed calls blinked on the screen. None from Mike, he knew. When the phone rang again, I finally picked up. "Hey," he said quietly. "You sound lighter. I think I'm just done," I said. "Then do something about it. Not for revenge, for peace." That line hit deeper than I expected. At 1:04 a.m., I drafted one last message to my mother. "I'm leaving for Dublin Monday. Please stop contacting me unless it's an emergency." I hovered over send hand, trembling. Then I pressed it. The next morning, the retaliation came fast. Posts on Facebook about ungrateful children, Aunt Rose's chain messages about forgiveness, Jenna's cryptic story. Sometimes the ones you love hold you back. They wanted me to feel shame. Instead, I felt still. When Monday came, I zipped up my suitcase. The air in my apartment was cold clean. Every bill in my name, every key in my hand. As I rolled my suitcase to the door, my phone buzzed one last time. A text from Mom. "We won't forget this." I typed back, slowly, "Neither will I." Then I powered it off. At the airport, as the plane engines roared, I thought about every Thanksgiving table, every guilt trip, every silent yes that had built their comfort. and I thought about that one small no that tore it all down. When the wheels left the ground, my heart did too. Dublin was colder than I imagined, gray skies, damp air, and a kind of silence I wasn't used to. But maybe that's why it felt like healing. My company apartment was small, one-bedroom, white walls, a view of the canal. Everything inside belonged to me. Every bill, every key, every decision. No shared accounts. No borrowed peace. For the first week, I moved like someone learning to breathe again. I woke up early, walked to work through cobblestone streets, and drank coffee that actually tasted like mine. At night, I cooked for one and listened to the kettle whistle. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for the next crisis call that never came. The quiet felt strange until it didn't. Mike arrived that Friday, suitcase in hand, and a grin that made the place feel less foreign. "You really did it," he said. "You left." I laughed softly. "Yeah." And somehow I'm still standing. He looked around the apartment. "It's peaceful here." "Peaceful feels weird," I admitted, "but I'll get used to it." We ate dinner on the couch, candles flickering against the rain-streaked window. My phone sat face down on the table, silent. When I finally picked it up, there were no new messages. For the first time in years, the absence of noise felt like a blessing. Days turned into weeks. I got promoted early, led my first project, made friends who didn't need rescuing. One afternoon, I scrolled through old notes, the payments bills, utilities list I'd once treated like scripture. At the bottom, I added one final line, "Debt cleared emotionally and otherwise." A month later, Mom left a voicemail. Her tone was softer this time. "We're fine, sweetheart. Jenna found part-time work. Your dad says hi." I didn't call back, but I smiled anyway. Distance was doing what love never could. It made things kinder. Sometimes I'd stand by the window watching the canal lights ripple. The old Emma would have felt guilty for feeling okay. The new one just whispered, "I earned this." Sunday morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, catching the steam from my coffee. No buzzing phone, no new demands, just quiet. I thought about that first text, the one that ended 15 years of family peace. "You'll take care of us." Maybe once I would have, but not anymore. I used to mistake being needed for being loved. Now I know real love doesn't drain you, it steadies you. I looked out over the Dublin skyline, smiling to myself. Peace didn't come with fireworks, it came with silence. If you've ever chosen peace over guilt, share your story below. You're not alone.
Hi everyone, my name is Aria Morgan and I'm 28 years old. If you looked at me that night, leaning quietly against the wall at my boyfriend's party, you'd probably think I was fine, maybe even bored. But inside, something was splintering. I just didn't know it yet. The bass from the speakers pulsed through the floor, shaking the bottles on the counter. Matthew's parties were always like this, loud, messy, overflowing, with people who laughed too hard at things they'd forget the next morning. I used to think his chaos was magnetic. Now it just felt exhausting. Matthew thrived in noise. He liked to be seen, the loudest laugh, the biggest presence. And me, I was the quiet one, the one who made sure there were clean glasses, who reminded him to eat before he drank too much, who knew the Wi-Fi password by heart when someone inevitably asked. I stood there nursing a half-warm drink, pretending to enjoy myself while scanning the crowd. He was in the middle of it, as always, surrounded by friends and strangers, a drink in one hand, his other arm slung casually around Dana, a woman from his office. I'd met her once, the kind who wore confidence like perfume, intoxicating, heavy, impossible to ignore. She leaned in close to whisper something in Matthew's ear, and he threw his head back in laughter. That laugh used to be my favorite sound. Tonight it made my stomach twist. "Don't overthink it," I whispered to myself, the way you talk to a frightened child. He's just being friendly. But then the chant began. "Do it! Do it!" someone yelled. The crowd clapped, laughing. I frowned, trying to see through the flashing lights. Matthew and Dana stood at the center now, the crowd forming a loose circle around them. "What's happening?" I asked a girl nearby. She grinned. Truth or dare? Someone dared them to kiss. My heart froze. I waited for Matthew to laugh it off. He was good at laughing things off, but instead he smirked, tilted his head at Dana, and said something I couldn't hear over the music. Then, before I could process what was happening, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't playful. It wasn't funny. It was slow, deep, deliberate. The crowd howled with approval. I couldn't breathe. The sound faded into a muffled roar, the kind you hear underwater when your body decides to shut down to protect you. My chest tightened. Someone's hand brushed my shoulder, maybe to comfort me, maybe to point me out, but I stepped back, shaking it off. When Matthew finally pulled away, the look on his face wasn't guilt. It was pride, like he'd just won something. Then his eyes found mine. For half a second, something flickered, maybe regret, maybe surprise. But just as quickly, he smirked again and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Relax, babe. It was a dare. Don't be so sensitive." A wave of laughter followed. I stood still. The humiliation burned through my skin, hotter than anger, sharper than heartbreak. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out dramatically the way the movies tell you to. I just turned, walked to the kitchen, and poured my untouched drink down the sink. The fizzing sound was soft, almost mercifully quiet. Then I took my jacket from the hook and left. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. The drive home was a blur of red taillights and empty thoughts. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my heart felt hollow. Every word he'd ever used to minimize me replayed in my mind like a cruel mantra. You're overreacting. You're too serious. You're too sensitive. By the time I pulled into our driveway, something inside me had gone completely still. I sat in the dark for a while, staring at the front door, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator inside. This was the home we'd built, the one I'd filled with quiet touches he never noticed, folded laundry, stocked shelves, the lamp he said made the room too soft. Now it all felt like the stage set waiting for an actor who'd forgotten their lines. When Matthew stumbled in, hours later, I was still sitting there in the living room in the dark. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. "Arya," he called, fumbling with his keys. "Why are you sitting like that, God? You look like a ghost." He flipped the switch. I didn't move. "Are you seriously mad about the dare thing?" He laughed too loudly. It was a joke. Everyone was laughing. "You should have seen your face, though. You take things way too seriously." Still, I said nothing. He sighed, tossing his jacket onto the couch. "Oh, come on. This again." The silent treatment, really. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, almost detached. Was the tongue part of the dare, too? He froze. "Excuse me. You kissed her like you meant it." He rolled his eyes, incredulous. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It didn't mean anything. You're acting crazy." Maybe I said standing, but at least I'm not pretending not to feel. He blinked, thrown off by my tone. No tears, no trembling. Just even quiet finality. "Are you breaking up with me over a stupid party game?" I didn't answer. I turned, walked to the bedroom, and began folding clothes into a small suitcase. Behind me, his voice rose. "You're being ridiculous, Arya. You can't just leave because your ego got bruised." But I didn't respond. The rhythm of folding fold smooth pack became my shield. When I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound was soft but absolute. I rolled it to the door, slipped on my shoes, and said the last words he would hear from me for a very long time. "You called me too sensitive for feeling hurt, but I think it takes strength to feel it all." Then I left. The door closed behind me with a click that felt like the end of a sentence and the beginning of something new. I didn't cry that night. People always assume heartbreak looks like sobbing into a pillow. Mascara running, clutching your chest like in some tragic romance film. But for me, it was quiet, a kind of numb silence that felt like standing underwater while the world kept spinning above. When I arrived at Lila's apartment just after midnight, she took one look at me and didn't ask a single question. She just opened the door wider. "Guest room's clean," she said softly. "You can stay as long as you need." I nodded. My suitcase felt heavier than it should have. In her small apartment, the ticking of the wall clock was the only sound. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at my hands, wondering if I'd done the right thing. 3 years of my life gone in the space of a single kiss. I replayed everything, like my brain was trying to find the moment when it all went wrong. The first time Matthew told me I was too serious. The second time he said, "Don't overthink it." The third when he laughed after I told him that his jokes sometimes embarrassed me in front of friends. He'd always said those words with a smile, like they were harmless. But they weren't. They were tiny, invisible cuts that finally became too deep to ignore. Lila appeared in the doorway holding a cup of tea. "You want to talk about it?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Okay," she said, setting the cup down on the nightstand. "Just don't let him make you feel like you overreacted. You're allowed to feel hurt." I stared at the steam rising from the cup, thin, delicate, dissolving into the air. I'm just tired, I whispered. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, drawing pale stripes across the floor. I woke up to a phone vibrating beside me, Matthew's name lighting up the screen. I stared at it until it stopped. Then I turned it face down. I took a long shower, letting the water run until it stopped feeling like an escape and started feeling like a decision. When I stepped out, I knew what I needed to do. Back at the apartment, Matthew was waiting. He must have stayed up all night, because when I opened the door, he was sitting on the couch, still in last night's clothes. Finally, he said, standing, "Can we just talk like adults? You seriously left over that?" I ignored the question and walked to the bedroom. My movements were methodical, like I was performing a routine I'd practiced 1,000 times, except this time it was real. I started packing the rest of my things, books, shoes, the plant I'd kept by the window. Matthew followed me pacing. "Arya, come on. It was a stupid dare. Everyone was laughing. You're making this bigger than it is." I folded another shirt. "It's not the kiss, Matthew." "Then what is it?" he snapped. "It's the way you made me feel like I was wrong for caring." He blinked momentarily, speechless. Then with a bitter laugh, "God, you always twist everything into some emotional lesson. You're exhausting." I paused, holding the last shirt in my hands. "Then I guess you'll finally get to rest." That shut him up. He watched as I zipped the bag shut. The sound echoed like the final seal on a coffin. I grabbed my keys from the counter. His voice softened suddenly, turning almost childlike. "You're really leaving, yes. Over this, because of everything before this." He didn't reply. He just stood there frozen as I wheeled my suitcase toward the door. When I reached it, he called out again, his voice smaller now. "Arya, please don't do this. You're gonna regret it." I turned around slowly. For a second, I wanted to say something kind, something to ease the sting. But then I saw his expression, the same self-assured smirk that had once charmed me now, just an echo of arrogance, and I realized he wasn't sorry. He just didn't want to lose control. I opened the door. "Maybe," I said softly, "but at least I'll regret something that's mine." Back at Lila's, I placed my phone on the kitchen counter and blocked his number. Then I sat by the window, staring at the street below. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after devastation, not happiness, but stillness. No chaos, no noise, just the sound of your own breath reminding you you're still here. For days, I didn't speak much. I worked remotely, made simple meals, helped Lila with her garden on the balcony. Each small action felt deliberate, like I was slowly rewiring myself. But silence can be dangerous too. It starts as protection, then becomes habit. I stopped answering texts, stopped checking social media. The quiet that had once comforted me began to feel like a room with no doors. One night, while watering the plants, Lila said quietly, "You can't hide forever, Arya." "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm healing." She gave a small smile. "Healing's good. Just don't confuse it with disappearing." Her words stayed with me. Later that week, I found myself driving past my parents' old house. My dad used to keep a set of woodworking tools in the garage. I used to love helping him as a kid, sanding old furniture, fixing broken chairs. Matthew once told me it was a boring hobby. I stopped doing it after that. Now, staring at the dusty windows of that empty garage, something stirred inside me, a strange longing to build again, to make something that couldn't talk back, couldn't lie, couldn't hurt me. That night, I searched online for a small workshop space. By morning, I had signed a lease for a tiny room in an old industrial building across town. It smelled like dust and possibility. I didn't know it then, but that small decision, that quiet step, would be the beginning of everything that came next. The first morning I walked into my rented workshop, sunlight filtered through the high windows, cutting through dust that hung in the air like golden fog. The room was almost empty, a workbench, a few rusty tools, a single bulb that buzzed when I turned it on. But to me it felt like a cathedral. I placed my hands on the old wooden table and closed my eyes. For the first time in months I could hear my heartbeat. It wasn't racing, it was calm, steady, present. That's what woodworking always did for me. It reminded me that even broken things could be made beautiful again if you were patient enough to sand away the rough edges. I started small, a simple frame, then a stool, then a shelf. My hands were slow, at first clumsy even, but each movement became a kind of prayer. The sound of the saw, the scrape of sandpaper, the scent of pine. It was therapy, honest, quiet therapy that didn't demand I talk about my pain. When I wasn't working with my hands, I was sketching new designs. I'd lose hours in that room, letting the rhythmic motion drown out the noise in my mind. Lila came by one afternoon with lunch. She stood in the doorway watching as I carefully smoothed the edge of a walnut slab. "Wow," she said. "You look peaceful." I smiled faintly. "This is the first time I've built something for myself in years." She handed me a sandwich and nodded. "Feels like you're rebuilding more than furniture." She wasn't wrong. That night, as I locked up, I got a notification on my phone, an email from Matthew. The subject line read, "Can we talk?" I didn't open it. I stared at it for a moment, feeling nothing. No rage, no heartbreak. Just a distant awareness that this was once the person who could ruin my entire week with a single sentence. Then, without hesitation, I deleted it. Meanwhile, life seemed to be unraveling for Matthew. Lila still had mutual friends with some of his crowd, and the stories trickled back to me without me asking. He'd been suspended from work, something about a leak confidential information, a big client, and apparently Dana, the woman from the party, was somehow involved. I listened in silence as Lila explained it over coffee. They were pitching to this traditional company, she said, and Matthew was bragging about their strategy to impress Dana. One of her friends overheard told a competitor. The deal fell apart. Was he fired? I asked quietly. Pretty much. And from what I hear, Dana dropped him right after. I stirred my coffee slowly. Karma's efficient. Lila tilted her head. Do you feel better hearing that I thought about it? Not really. It's just ironic. He always said I was the dramatic one. Over the next few weeks, my workshop became my sanctuary. Every piece of furniture I built carried pieces of my healing, my anger, my silence, my forgiveness. I was shaping wood, but in a way, the wood was reshaping me. One evening, I started working on something new, a live-edge walnut coffee table. The slab was heavy, uneven, marked by deep grooves and imperfections. Matthew would have called it flawed. I called it honest. As I planed and polished, I began talking to the wood the way you talk to yourself in prayer. You're not ruined, I whispered. You just need patience. The rhythmic motion of the sanding block was almost hypnotic. Every stroke felt like an exhale. Every layer of dust that fell away revealed something stronger underneath. When I finally finished smoothing the surface, I ran my hand across the grain. It was warm, resilient, imperfectly beautiful. Just like me. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed again. This time a voicemail, his voice. Aria, please. I know I messed up. I got fired. Dana, she turned out to be nothing. I can't stop thinking about you. You were the only one who really cared about me. The sound of his voice, once a trigger for panic, now barely stirred anything at all. I stood in the middle of my workshop phone, still in hand, as his words echoed against the wood and tools around me. When the message ended, I deleted it. Then I turned the sander back on and kept working. The table took me nearly 3 weeks to complete. When I was done, it gleamed under the workshop light, dark and rich with a satin finish. I pressed my palm against it, feeling the grain beneath my fingertips. There was a sense of completion, not just in the table, but in me. I thought of Matthew again briefly, how he once mocked this hobby, calling it a waste of time. And I realized how wrong he was, because this act of creation had saved me. When I turned off the lights and locked the door that night, I looked back one last time. The table sat there in the center of the room, catching the last light from the window. Solid, grounded, whole. Something I could finally say about myself. By the time autumn came, the silence I'd once feared had become my closest companion. The air in my workshop grew cooler, sharper, carrying the faint scent of rain through the cracked windows. I'd arrive early each morning with coffee in hand, put on an old record, and work until my muscles ached in the best possible way. Peace, I realized, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It crept in quietly like sawdust, settling on wood, barely noticeable until one day you look around and realize the chaos is gone. But outside my cocoon, Matthew's world was splintering. I hadn't heard from him in months. Not directly, anyway. The few mutual friends we still had shared pieces of gossip that reached me like faint echoes. He'd tried freelancing, but burned bridges followed him wherever he went. The story about the leaked client deal had spread fast, and no one wanted to hire him. Dana, his just a friend, had already moved on. She'd started dating someone else at their firm and made sure everyone knew. It was poetic, really. Matthew had spent years convincing me that I was the sensitive one, the problem, the weight holding him down. Now, with no one left to blame, he was discovering what true isolation felt like. It started small, a text from an unknown number late one night. Unknown Aria. I know you probably hate me, but I lost my job. Dana's gone. Everything's a mess. I miss you. I stared at the message for a long time. The woman I had been months ago, the one who would have written back instantly offering comfort, she still lived somewhere deep inside me. But she was quieter now, wiser. I didn't reply. I simply swiped it away and put the phone face down. 2 days later, another message came. This one a voicemail. Please, Arya, just talk to me. I made a huge mistake. You were the only person who ever believed in me. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I stopped it halfway through, deleted it. By the end of the week, the calls turned frantic, then angry, then silent again. One night I found myself sitting on my apartment floor, the finished walnut table in front of me. My hands brushed across its smooth surface as if tracing a map of my own healing. The apartment was small, but it was mine, filled with soft light, gentle music, and the steady pulse of my own breathing. Lila came over that weekend bringing food and the kind of gentle chaos that only best friends bring. I can't believe you actually built all this, she said, admiring the furniture. It's like walking into an art studio that smells like fresh pine. I smiled. It's been good. Centering. She gave me a sly look, and completely Matthew-free. I laughed quietly. That too. Then, as if summoned by the sound of his name, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown message. I didn't have to read it to know who it was, but I did. Unknown. My mom said she saw you at the grocery store. You look good. I can't stop crying. I need my best friend. Best friend. The words almost made me laugh. He'd never been my best friend. He'd been a hurricane I mistook for warmth. I set the phone aside and said softly, I think I finally understand something. Lila looked up. What is that forgiveness isn't for them? It's for you, so you can stop replaying what you can't fix. She smiled gently. Sounds like you're almost free. But Matthew wasn't done. The next day, I got another message, this time from Stacy, one of his old party friends. Hey, Arya. Look, I know Matthew messed up, but he's really trying. He's in a bad place. Can't you just talk to him closure or something? I could almost hear her tone the same patronizing pity she'd once used when Matthew and I fought at parties. This time, I replied. Just one line. Stacy, please don't contact me again. That was it. Simple. Clear. A boundary that didn't need an explanation. For a few blessed hours, it was quiet again. Then the storm hit. Unknown, fine. I get it. Unknown. You're just a cold, heartless person. Unknown. You're happy I'm suffering, aren't you? Unknown. You always loved playing the victim. Unknown. You're too weak to handle someone real. There it was, the real Matthew. The one beneath the charm and the excuses. The man who only felt powerful when he could make someone else feel small. I didn't respond. I just sat on the couch reading each message as if it were a case study in who he truly was. Then one by one I took screenshots not to share but to remember. To remind myself on the hard days that I wasn't crazy, that this was what I had escaped. I titled the folder Closure. Then I blocked the number. That night I went to bed early. The room was still and dark, the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. I thought about how Matthew used to hate rain, said it made him feel trapped. For me, it was the opposite. Rain always made me feel safe, like the world was finally quiet enough to start over. And maybe that's exactly what I was doing, starting over grain by grain, breath by breath. 6 months later, I was no longer the same woman who had walked out of that party with trembling hands and a silent heart. My life had become still. Not dull still. Like the quiet that comes after a storm when the world finally exhales. The workshop was thriving now. People started commissioning small pieces, shelves, benches, custom coffee tables. Sometimes they asked me why I named my studio Grain and Grace. I'd smile and say, because that's how healing works, slowly, layer by layer, until the rough edges turn into something graceful. I wasn't just building furniture anymore, I was building peace. And then there was Wayne. He wasn't loud like Matthew. He didn't fill silence with noise. He listened. We met one afternoon when he came by to order a reclaimed wood bench for a rooftop garden he was designing. A landscape architect with steady hands and a voice that always carried calm. I remember how he ran his fingers over the wood and said, "You can tell when someone treats the material with respect. You don't force it, you let it breathe." The words lingered with me long after he left. 3 weeks later, when he came to pick up the finished bench, he asked if I wanted to see the garden once it was done, and that was how it began, quietly, naturally, like the slow opening of sunlight through clouds. A few months later, Wayne invited me to an art gallery opening. Downtown, one of his colleagues was hosting an exhibition of metal and stone sculptures. The gallery was small, intimate, with white walls and soft jazz humming in the background. People moved slowly between pieces, sipping wine, murmuring quietly. I loved the contrast, how clean and intentional everything felt, the kind of place Matthew would have called pretentious. But to me, it felt like home. Wayne stood beside me, explaining the details of a bronze figure, how the artist had used imperfections to tell a story of resilience. It's not about making it flawless, he said. It's about honoring what's already there. I smiled, resting my hand lightly on his arm. You sound like me in the workshop, he grinned. Maybe that's why we get along. And then without warning, the air changed. It's hard to describe it, that instinctive shift when someone's presence slices through the calm like a cold wind. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I felt him before I saw him. Matthew. When I finally did glance over, it was almost surreal. He looked smaller somehow. The confidence that once radiated from him had withered into something brittle. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly unkempt. Even his posture, that easy, arrogant slouch, was gone. He was scanning the crowd, eyes darting anxiously until they landed on me. For a moment I thought he might look away, but he didn't. He walked straight toward me. Wayne sensed the tension immediately. Do you know him? He asked quietly. I nodded once. I used to. Matthew stopped a few feet away, his voice barely above a whisper. Arya, please, can we talk? His tone was raw, stripped of bravado. The voice of someone who'd run out of people to charm. I turned to face him, fully calm but distant. Matthew, I didn't expect to see you here. He swallowed hard. I didn't expect to see you either. I've been trying to reach you, I know. For a long moment, he just stared at me. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression lost. I ruined everything. My job, my friends, you. You were right about everything. I was stupid and cruel and... His voice cracked. I destroyed the best thing I ever had. The room around us faded. I could hear my heartbeat steady and unbothered. Months ago, those words would have shattered me. Now they just floated in the air, empty, weightless. I looked at him not with anger, but with a strange, detached pity. I appreciate you saying that, I said softly. A flicker of hope lit his eyes. Then maybe... But the woman who needed to hear that apology, I continued, doesn't exist anymore. His mouth opened, then closed again. I watched the realization sink in, slow and heavy. I'm not angry, Matthew, I said. I just don't feel anything anymore. You called me sensitive for caring. But you never understood that sensitivity isn't weakness. It's depth, and you were too shallow to swim there. The silence that followed was deafening. Then gently I turned toward Wayne, who had been standing quietly by my side, steady as an anchor. Wayne, I said with a small smile. This is Matthew, someone I used to know. Then turning back, Matthew, this is my boyfriend Wayne. Matthew blinked, the words hitting him like a delayed blow. Wayne extended a polite hand. Nice to meet you. Matthew didn't take it. He just stood there, frozen, his face pale and unreadable. I placed my hand on Wayne's arm. Come on, I said calmly. Let's see the rest of the exhibit. We walked away. I didn't look back. Outside, the evening air was cool and gentle. I breathed it in deeply, the scent of rain, metal, and freedom. Are you okay? Wayne asked softly. I nodded. Yeah, I actually am. When I got home later that night, I lit a small candle in my workshop and sat by the walnut table, my first creation, the one that had seen me through every phase of breaking and rebuilding. I traced my fingers along the grain, feeling its smoothness beneath the light. The wood had changed shape under my hands, but I realized so had I. Once Matthew's words had made me question my worth. Now I didn't need his validation or his apology to feel whole. It wasn't revenge that satisfied me. It was peace. And peace, I learned, is louder than any apology. I smiled to myself and whispered, it was never about being too sensitive. It was about feeling enough. The candle flickered once, then burned steady, just like me. My name is Katrina Hansen, and I'm 32 years old. If you'd told me a year ago that my entire life would collapse over a dinner bill, I would have laughed. But sometimes destruction doesn't come as fire, and thunder, it comes as quiet words over candlelight. Nicholas and I met when we were both 27, wide-eyed and overconfident, trying to build something meaningful in a world obsessed with speed. He worked in marketing, the kind of person who called himself a brand architect before he even had a brand. I worked in tech project management, reliable, predictable, the person who remembered passwords, rent due dates, and renewal dates for his domain subscriptions. In our early days, it felt like partnership. I believed in his fire. He admired my steadiness. We built routines that looked like love-shared coffee mugs, late-night brainstorming sessions, post-it notes on mirrors with tiny affirmations. But somewhere between, I'm proud of you, and you don't dream big enough, the language changed. It started subtle, compliments that twisted into comparisons. Jade from my team just got promoted again. She reminds me of you, only more daring. I laughed it off the first few times. Everyone's allowed admiration. But eventually, admiration became measurement. Nicholas began to scroll through social media at dinner, showing me videos of real go-getters, startup founders, luxury influencers, the kind of people who post 5 a.m. gym photos and call it hustle. See, that's drive, he'd say, eyes still on his screen. I'd nod, pretending not to notice the implication. And you're not that. Still, I kept supporting him. When his father got sick, I covered rent so he could take unpaid leave. When he wanted to attend a marketing summit abroad, I dipped into my savings money meant for launching my own consulting business just so he could network. He came back glowing, overflowing with stories about visionaries and disruptors. I remember smiling, genuinely happy for him, even as a quiet ache settled in my chest. The cracks widened quietly. He started working late, then later. Team drinks he'd text, sometimes not coming home until after midnight. I trusted him until trust started to feel like naivety. Then came that dinner, the night the ground shifted beneath me. It was a Friday evening in early spring, and the restaurant was one of our usual spots downtown. White tablecloths, amber lighting, soft jazz, humming from ceiling speakers. A place that used to feel like ours. I remember I'd taken extra care getting ready that night, pale blue dress, light makeup, trying to recapture something I couldn't name. Nicholas arrived looking sharp as always. Dark blazer, expensive cologne, the kind that announces itself before he does. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. There was tension beneath it, something rehearsed. We ordered, talked about work, the weather, anything but us. Halfway through his steak, he put his fork down and leaned back. Katrina, we need to talk. Those 5 words have ruined more lives than any storm. I smiled faintly. Okay, what's wrong? He sighed like a martyr preparing for sainthood. You're great, really. You've been my rock. But lately I feel like you're holding me back. I blinked. Holding you back. He nodded like he was delivering wisdom, not betrayal. I've been thinking a lot about where I'm headed. My career's finally taking off. And I realized I could do so much better. I need someone who pushes me, who matches my ambition. The words landed like shards of glass. I could have argued, begged, cried. But something about the way he said it, calm, confident, final, froze me. I stared at him, my heartbeat a steady thud in my ears. So what are you saying, Nicholas? He hesitated for exactly 1 second, then shrugged. I've been seeing someone. Her name's Jade. From work. It just happened. She understands me, Katrina. She gets the pressure, the drive. The restaurant sounds dimmed, like the world went underwater. I studied him, the man I'd cooked for, supported, believed in, and saw only ego. You're cheating on me, I said quietly. He had the nerve to smile. It's not cheating if the relationship's already over. You checked out months ago. I laughed once, bitter and low. You mean after covering your rent, paying for your conferences, and holding your world together while you found yourself? Yeah, I must have missed the part where I checked out. His expression hardened. See, that's exactly the energy I'm talking about. Always guilt-tripping, always playing safe. I looked at him for a long time, something cold settling behind my ribs. You know, Nicholas? I thought ambition meant building something together, not stepping on whoever helped you get there. He rolled his eyes, gesturing for the waiter. I didn't expect you to understand. Let's not make this dramatic. So I didn't. When this bill came, I slid my card onto the tray, paid it in full, then stood up my chair, scraping softly against the floor. That's it, he asked, almost offended. No fight, no scene. I smiled faintly. You want passion, Nicholas? You'll find it. Just be careful, fire burns. I turned and walked out before he could answer. The night air outside was cold, sharp, almost cleansing. City lights blurred as I walked toward my car, heart hammering, but strangely steady. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just breathed. By the time I reached the driver's seat, my hands were shaking. My phone buzzed a text from him. You're really just walking away. This is why we never worked. I didn't reply. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes, glossy lips trembling, and whispered, Maybe it's time I stop working on you and start working on me. That night, I packed my essentials, left the apartment key on the counter, and drove aimlessly until sunrise. I didn't know where I was going, only that anywhere else was better than where I'd been. Somewhere between the dark and the dawn, it hit me this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of one hell of a comeback. When I woke up the next morning, the world felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just hollow. The kind of silence that follows a house fire. I'd spent the night at a budget hotel off the freeway, surrounded by stale coffee smell and flickering fluorescent light. My suitcase sat half open on the floor, spilling out a mess of folded clothes and regret. I remember staring at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, whispering, "What now?" Nicholas's toothbrush used to sit beside mine. His cologne used to linger on my pillow. Now even his absence smelled loud. I took a deep breath, opened my phone, and saw 3 new messages, all from him. Nicholas. We both said things we didn't mean. Nicholas. I just needed honesty, Katrina. Nicholas. Let's talk later. Maybe we can stay friends. I stared at the screen, then powered off my phone. Friends, no. Not after what he said. Not after the months I spent building him while he was already planning his exit. I took the rest of the weekend off work and just existed. Ate takeout, watched old comfort shows, cried and burst. So unpredictable, I started keeping tissues in every room. But grief has an expiration date, and mine arrived one Monday morning when I finally opened my laptop again. My to-do list glared at me: deadlines, project briefs, unpaid invoices. Life was still moving, so I moved with it. In the weeks that followed, I rented a small studio apartment near the edge of the city. 1 window, 1 bed, 1 desk, a place small enough that the silence couldn't hide. Therapy came next, an idea from a friend who gently suggested I might need to process. My therapist, Dr. Tran, had kind eyes and a voice like chamomile tea. She didn't tell me to forgive him. She told me to see him. He didn't betray you out of love, Katrina, she said in one session, tapping her pen thoughtfully. He betrayed you out of fear. People like Nicholas are terrified of being ordinary, and when you stayed stable, you became a mirror for everything he hated about himself. I sat there silent. That word mirror hit something deep, because I'd started noticing it too. His obsession with people who looked successful, not necessarily were successful. His need to be admired by everyone but the one person who loved him. Dr. Tran smiled softly. You can spend years wondering why he didn't value you. Or you can start asking why you valued someone who didn't see you at all. That night I deleted his photos. Not in anger, but in release. Every pixel gone felt like reclaiming air. Slowly I started remembering who I was before him. I'd always been ambitious, just quietly so. I dreamed of starting my own consulting business, helping startups streamline operations. But I'd shelved it because Nicholas said it wasn't scalable enough. Funny coming from a man who couldn't scale basic empathy. Now I reopened those old files. Business plans, client proposals, abandoned drafts. My laptop felt like a time capsule of the woman I used to be. I spent nights building a new version of my life, literally. Website, logo, brand, colors, even a motto. Structure is freedom. It was ironic. The same structure Nicholas mocked became my liberation. My first few clients were small, local cafes, freelancers needing workflow guidance. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every invoice I sent felt like reclaiming a brick from the wreckage. Still, the memories hit, sometimes especially late at night. Flashbacks to the things I'd done for him. The time I pawned my camera to help him pay rent when his dad's hospital bills piled up. The way I'd stayed up proofreading his proposals while he slept beside me, dreaming about the applause he'd get. I used to tell myself that's what love was, sacrifice. Now I realized I'd confused sacrifice with self-erasure. One evening, about 2 months after the breakup, I attended a small networking event downtown. My business mentor had insisted, Katrina, you can't rebuild in silence. Get seen. Get connected. The room buzzed with casual conversations and the clinking of wine glasses. I introduced myself awkwardly at first, handing out my business cards like a teenager passing notes in class. But then something shifted. A woman from a software startup asked for my input on a project workflow issue. I offered a few quick suggestions and her face lit up. You're good at this, she said. Ever think about consulting full-time? I smiled, working on it. That night I walked home lighter. For the first time in months, I wasn't defined by heartbreak, but by possibility. 3 weeks later, I got an unexpected message. Not from Nicholas, thank God, but from Tom, a mutual friend who worked in the same corporate building as him. Tom Hay ran into your ex today, just a heads up. Things don't look great on his end. I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I wanted to know, but curiosity, that dangerous seed, took root. Tom called me that evening, voice low. He's different. Rumor is he's been taking credit for campaign ideas that weren't his. Some of the ones you helped him brainstorm, I think. People are starting to notice. His new girlfriend, Jade. Apparently, she's been helping him pitch them as her team's concepts. For a moment, I said nothing, just listened. Anyway, Tom added, I thought you'd want to know. I hung up, sat in silence, and exhaled slowly. Not satisfaction, just confirmation. The universe doesn't always punish loudly. Sometimes it whispers. That night, I journaled until my wrist ached. Not about revenge, but about clarity. About how sometimes letting go isn't weakness. It's a warning to the other person that you're finally done absorbing their damage. I wrote, forgiveness doesn't mean I want him back. It means I no longer care if he ever looks back. And for the first time since that awful dinner, I slept through the night. Because deep down I knew one thing with certainty, Nicholas hadn't broken me. He'd just shown me how much stronger I could be once I stopped holding him up. By the time summer rolled around, I had grown comfortable in solitude. The studio apartment that once felt too small now felt like peace made visible a space filled only with the sound of my own breathing, my own choices. No second toothbrush, no half-hearted apologies, no weight that wasn't mine to carry. Every morning began the same way, black coffee sunlight filtering through thin curtains, laptop open by 7 a.m. I'd lost the chaos of partnership, but found rhythm. My consulting business, Hansen Project Solutions, had grown from a side hustle into something quietly alive. One client turned into 3. 3 turned into 6. I wasn't rich, but the invoices cleared, and every new email felt like a small victory. I'd built something from nothing while Nicholas, well, I hadn't heard from him in months. Until one afternoon during a networking conference. Tom spotted me across the lobby, his usual warm grin fading into something unreadable. Katrina, he said after the polite greetings, you might want to sit down for this. I laughed lightly. That's serious? He nodded. You remember those campaign ideas you and Nicholas used to bounce around? The ones you came up with, the micro-branding pitch and the emotional engagement model. My stomach tightened. Of course. Well, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, Nicholas has been passing them off as his own. He pitched them in a client meeting last quarter, landed a big project off it with Jade's help. For a second, the words didn't sink in. Then they did, heavy and sharp. My hands tightened around my coffee cup. He used my work. Tom nodded. Yeah. And rumor has it he's been spiraling. Management started catching on when he couldn't replicate the results. People in his department say Jade's already distancing herself. The image formed in my head. Nicholas in some glass-walled conference room, pitching stolen ideas with his too smooth smile, unaware that the floor beneath him was cracking. I didn't gloat. Not then. I just sipped my coffee quiet. Karma didn't need witnesses, it only needed patience. That night, as I drove home, the city glowed outside my car window, the same skyline I once thought I'd share with him. But this time it looked different. Not smaller, not lonelier, just mine. In the parking lot, I sat for a while watching the rain streak across the windshield. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about him without pain. Only recognition. Nicholas had always been a man addicted to momentum. He mistook chaos for progress. The higher he climbed, the faster he burned. 2 weeks later, Tom messaged me again. Tom, you won't believe this. Jade dumped him. Tom. Apparently, HR got an anonymous tip about their office affair. Violated conduct policy. He's on probation. I blinked at the screen, then set the phone aside. The universe didn't need my applause. It was doing fine on its own. But a strange emotion simmered beneath my calm, not vengeance, not pity. Something quieter. Closure, maybe. As my business grew, new opportunities followed. I joined online panels, spoke at small events about independent growth after career burnout. Ironically, the lessons came from surviving Nicholas, though I never mentioned him by name. I became the kind of woman I once envied, grounded, articulate, self-sufficient. And yet late some nights, I'd catch myself scrolling through his old social media just to see if he was still pretending everything was fine. The posts had changed. No more luxury brunches or motivational captions, just vague quotes about resilience, maybe a gym mirror selfie every now and then. He looked thinner, tired. I closed the app. I'd seen enough. A few months later, my company landed its biggest client, yet a mid-sized software firm, looking to restructure their project management process. The CEO, a kind but overworked woman named Hannah, said she'd found my website through a referral. Your structure is freedom line, she told me during our first call that hit me hard. I want that for my team. We signed the contract the next day. That evening, I sat alone at my desk and cried, not out of sadness, but from the strange realization that I'd finally built something untouched by him. Around that time, I started meeting new people again, mostly through work. One name that kept appearing was Richard Park, a freelance designer who partnered with several of my clients. He was soft-spoken, attentive, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. We met for coffee to discuss a potential collaboration, but our conversation drifted far from work. We talked about failure, about people who outgrew us, about learning to breathe again after heartbreak. He smiled quietly and said, "Maybe we don't outgrow people. Maybe we just stop shrinking for them." Something about that line stayed with me long after he left. Weeks passed, and the Nicholas rumors kept trickling in, each one more pathetic than the last. He'd been passed over for a promotion. Jade had left the company. Some of his coworkers stopped speaking to him after HR confirmed the misconduct report. And then one afternoon, Tom sent one final message. "Tom, he's out. Fired last week. Word is he tried to start his own firm, but no one wanted to work with him." I read it twice, then set the phone down. No rush of satisfaction, no thrill, just quiet relief, like closing a chapter I'd already finished reading months ago. That night, I poured a glass of wine, lit a candle, and wrote in my journal. I thought revenge would taste sweet, but peace tastes better. A week later, I received an email from Nicholas. Subject line: "Hey, Katrina, long time." I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. "Hi, Katrina, hope you're doing well. I've been thinking a lot about how things ended. I realize now I made mistakes, big ones. Jade turned out to be someone I didn't really know, and well, it doesn't matter. I'm struggling, honestly. If you ever have time to talk, maybe we could grab coffee. No pressure, just closure." Closure, that word again. I hovered over reply for a moment, then closed the email. Instead, I whispered to the quiet room, "You don't owe explanations to the ghosts you've already buried." And as the screen dimmed, I smiled to myself. Because for the first time since the night of that dinner, I wasn't replaying what I'd lost, I was living what I'd found. The next time I saw Nicholas, he wasn't glowing with success, he was begging for help. The email sat unopened for weeks, buried beneath invoices and client updates. I never replied, though. Sometimes I hovered over the trash icon and paused. Not out of temptation, but because it reminded me that I had the power of silence. Silence had once been my weakness. Now it was my weapon. By autumn, my consulting business had doubled. Clients referred friends. Referrals became partnerships. Structure is freedom wasn't just a tagline anymore. It was a philosophy I lived by. Every time I looked at my growing spreadsheet of projects, I thought, he would have hated this. The quiet kind of success that doesn't need applause. Then one Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I let it ring out, but a voicemail followed immediately. "Katrina, it's Nicholas. I know I don't deserve to ask this, but please hear me out. Things have fallen apart. Jade. She used me, Katrina. Took my ideas, turned the team against me. I lost my job. I just need to talk to someone who actually knew me. Please." His voice cracked near the end, not the polished tone he'd used at dinner that night. This one was raw, strained, desperate. I didn't listen to it twice. I deleted it. Over the next few days, more messages followed, first polite, then pitiful, then manipulative. "You always saw the good in me. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just help. It's cruel to ignore someone who's drowning." Cruel. The word almost made me laugh. The same man who once said I was holding him back now claimed I was holding him underwater. Still, the guilt tried to creep in. It always does. That small, conditioned part of me whispered, "He's human. You used to love him. Shouldn't you care?" But Dr. Tran's words echoed louder. "You can have empathy without access." So I chose distance. A week later, my friend Maya called. She sounded hesitant. "Hey, I ran into Nicholas's brother at the gym," she said. "He told me Nicholas is staying with their parents. He's not doing great. Keeps saying you're the only one who ever grounded him." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. Maya. I'm not his anchor anymore. He cut the rope himself. There was silence on the other end, then a soft, "I know. Just thought you should know." The next message came through Tom. "Tom, Katrina, not trying to drag you in, but Nicholas has been reaching out to everyone. Says he wants to apologize. Guy looks rough. You sure you don't want to hear him out once?" Me, Tom, I already heard everything I needed to. He just didn't realize I was listening the first time. Tom, fair enough. Just thought I'd check. Tom was kind, always had been, but he didn't understand. People like Nicholas don't want closure. They want control. They crave redemption without the work that earns it. Then came the moment that tested everything I'd built. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, and I'd just wrapped a virtual meeting with a new client. I shut my laptop stretched and turned toward the window and froze. Nicholas was standing in the lobby of my office building, umbrella dripping, eyes wide like a man who'd forgotten how to knock. For a few seconds, I just stared, heart thudding. Then I grabbed my coat and went downstairs. He saw me before I spoke. "Katrina," he breathed out, voice trembling. "You actually came down." I crossed my arms. "You showed up uninvited. What do you want, Nicholas?" He took a shaky step forward. "I know I shouldn't have. I didn't know where else to go." "Jade. She destroyed everything. She told HR I was manipulative, said I harassed her. None of it's true. I lost everything, Katrina. I just need help finding my footing again." I kept my tone even. "Help! Like when I covered your rent while you found yourself, or when I funded your conference trip so you could meet Jade in the first place." His face fell. "That's not fair." "No," I interrupted softly, "it's finally fair." The rain outside made the lobby glass shimmer. He looked small beneath the fluorescent light, a man unraveling under the weight of his own choices. "I miss us," he whispered. "You grounded me. You believed in me. I didn't realize what I had." I tilted my head slightly. "You realized it. You just didn't value it." He flinched like the words were physical. "I'm trying to change, Katrina. I'm working on myself." I cut him off again, gentler this time. "Nicholas, you're not my responsibility anymore. You were never my project. If you want to rebuild, start where you fell. Alone." Tears welled in his eyes. "You're cruel." "No," I said, stepping back toward the elevator. "I'm consistent." He called after me as the doors began to close. "So that's it. You're just walking away again." I met his gaze one last time through the narrowing gap. "You taught me how." The door slid shut. That night he texted me again, messages flipping between apologies and insults. "You're heartless. You'll end up alone. Please just meet me one more time." I didn't reply. Instead, I took screenshots, then blocked his number. If I'd learned anything, it was that some people only respect boundaries when they hit a wall. Weeks passed, and I didn't hear from him. My world stayed steady, client calls, morning coffee, quiet evenings. And then, like life-rewarding silence, something unexpected bloomed in that calm. Richard, the designer. I'd met months before, started texting more frequently. First about work, then about life. He was thoughtful, never intrusive. He remembered details like my preference for lemon tea over coffee, or how I avoided noisy places. One evening, he asked, "Walk in the park after your last meeting tomorrow." I almost said no, instinctively guarded, but something in me whispered, "Say yes." We walked under the streetlights, talking about everything and nothing. He didn't fill silences with pity. He just existed beside me, quietly present. It wasn't fireworks. It was peace, something I didn't realize I'd missed. By the time I got home that night, I saw an unread email notification. From Nicholas, again. Subject line, "Help me, please." I hovered for a moment, then deleted it without opening. No hesitation this time. No second guessing. Just certainty. Because for once I didn't feel like I'd lost something. I felt like I'd finally stopped giving away what was never appreciated. By winter, I'd stopped glancing over my shoulder. Nicholas had gone quiet, or maybe I'd just stopped noticing. Silence no longer meant waiting. It meant peace. Business was steady, my life finally stable, and Richard steady kind. Richard had slowly woven himself into the edges of my routine. Coffee breaks turned into dinners. Dinners into weekends. He never tried to fix me. He just held space for what was left after I'd rebuilt. Then one day, I received an invitation that made my stomach twist. Tom's wedding. He'd been one of the few friends who stayed neutral after everything collapsed, never taking sides. We still worked together occasionally, and when his email popped up with "Save the date," I didn't think much of it until I scrolled down to the guest list. There it was, Nicholas Carter, RSVP, confirmed. For a moment, the old version of me stirred the anxious one, wondering if she could handle seeing him. But then I looked around my apartment, my life, and realized I wasn't afraid. I hit accept. The wedding was held at a vineyard just outside the city. Late afternoon sun spilled over rows of vines, the air sweet with lavender and slow music. Richard and I arrived hand in hand. As we walked up the gravel path, I saw faces from the old days, mutual friends, ex-co-workers, even one of Nicholas's former teammates. Some gave polite smiles, others gave curious ones, as if waiting to see if there'd be a scene. There wouldn't be, not for me. Richard leaned close, whispering, "You okay?" I nodded, better than ever. The ceremony was beautiful, string lights, soft vows, laughter that didn't sound forced. For a few hours I forgot about him, until I didn't. Because when I turned toward the reception hall, there he was, Nicholas, standing alone by the bar glass in hand, wearing a suit that no longer fit right. His posture, slumped hair, unkempt eyes, darting around like a man who didn't belong anywhere. He noticed me before I could look away. For a moment, time folded in on itself. We were back at that dinner, same look, same need to control the narrative. But this time, I wasn't trembling. He approached slowly, forcing a smile. "Katrina, wow, you look amazing." I smiled politely. "Thanks, you too." He gave a quiet laugh, but it broke halfway through. "Didn't think I'd see you here. Guess we both still have some mutual friends." "I guess we do." He hesitated, eyes glassy. "Listen, I know this isn't the place, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. For all of it. For how I treated you. For not realizing what I had." I waited a beat, apology accepted. His brows furrowed slightly. Just like that. I shrugged. "It's been a year, Nicholas. Holding a grudge would be a waste of energy." He nodded slowly like he wanted to believe that was good news. Then his tone shifted, a pleading edge beneath it. "You know I've been trying to get my life back together. I'm freelancing now, but it's hard. Jade wrecked my reputation, spread rumors, told clients I stole her ideas. Everyone turned their backs on me. I stayed quiet." He leaned closer. "You've always had connections, Katrina. You could help me. Maybe recommend me to one of your clients just to get my foot back in the door." There it was, the real reason. The same old rhythm apology guilt request. I exhaled slowly. "Nicholas, I'm not in the business of rebuilding people who broke themselves." His face tensed. "You don't have to be cruel." "I'm not," I said softly. "I'm being honest. You made your choices. You built the fire that burned you." He blinked, anger and desperation flickering across his face. "You think you're better than me now?" I met his gaze evenly. "No, I just stopped needing to be worse to make you feel better." That silenced him. I turned slightly, feeling Richard's hand at the small of my back. He'd seen enough to understand everything without a word. "Let's get some air," Richard murmured. We walked toward the terrace overlooking the vineyard, the string lights glowing against the dusk. Behind us, I could still feel Nicholas's stare, heavy, defeated, but powerless. Later that evening, during the toasts, I saw him again standing near the edge of the dance floor, alone, watching everyone else laugh. His eyes met mine for a second, then dropped. And for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness or satisfaction. Just clarity. He hadn't been the villain of my story, not entirely. He'd been the lesson. As the music swelled, Richard held out his hand. "Dance with me?" I smiled. "Always." We moved under the canopy of lights, laughter mingling with the hum of conversation. And for the first time in years, I felt light, unburdened. Across the room, Nicholas turned away, blending into the blur of guests, until he was just another shadow in a memory that no longer hurt. After the wedding, I wrote a note in my journal. Closure isn't confrontation. It's peace, and peace doesn't need witnesses. I'd spent years mistaking endurance for love, silence for strength, and forgiveness for return. Now I understood real healing was indifference. He looked broken that night, but as I watched him fade into the crowd, I realized something profound. You can't rescue someone who enjoys the fall. The morning after the wedding, the sunlight felt different, not blinding, not soft, just true. I woke up beside Richard, the sound of rain against the window, steady and calm. For a long moment, I just listened. No alarms, no noise, no chaos, pretending to be ambition. Peace used to scare me. Now it felt earned. Richard stirred, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You slept well," he said, smiling. "I did," I replied, surprised at the honesty of it. "First time in a long while." He kissed my forehead, then stood to make coffee. And as I watched him move around the kitchen, quiet, thoughtful, present, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of love. I was afraid of losing myself again. But Richard never asked me to shrink. He just made room. In the weeks that followed, life settled into something beautifully ordinary. My business expanded beyond what I'd imagined. I hired an assistant, a bright intern named Asha, and even rented a small office space. It wasn't grand, but it was filled with warmth plants on the windowsill, soft lighting, quiet music humming in the background. One afternoon, Asha looked up from her desk and said, "You're trending on LinkedIn, by the way." I blinked. "I'm what?" She grinned and turned her screen toward me. "Your blog post, the one you wrote about emotional boundaries and leadership, it's blowing up." I laughed softly, half in disbelief. I hadn't even meant for it to go viral. I'd written it one night out of reflection about how personal boundaries and professional success often come from the same muscle, the courage to say no. The title was simple: What I Learned About Leadership from a Broken Heart. Thousands of shares, dozens of comments, a speaking invitation from a leadership conference. It was surreal, but the irony wasn't lost on me. Everything Nicholas once mocked me for. The caution, the structure, the patience, those were the very things building my empire now. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I took a walk alone by the river. The city lights danced across the water, and in their reflection, I saw a woman I almost didn't recognize, calm, unhurried, free. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification, a message request, from an unfamiliar account, but the name beneath it made my stomach tighten. Nicholas Carter. He'd made a new profile. The message was short. "Hi, Katrina. Just wanted to say I saw your article. You were always good with words. I'm glad you're doing well. Take care." I stood there for a while, reading it under the amber streetlight. There was no apology this time, no manipulation, just finality. And strangely, that was enough. I didn't reply. I didn't block him either. I just let the message sit there, a ghost of something that once existed but no longer defined me. Months passed. My business took off faster than I could have planned. I spoke at conferences, led mentorship programs, and even started collaborating with Richard's design firm on joint projects. Our relationship wasn't built on dramatic decatrinations. It was built on quiet consistency. One evening, while reviewing slides for a seminar, Richard looked up and asked, "If you could go back to that version of you who walked out of that restaurant, what would you tell her?" I thought for a long moment, then said I'd tell her she didn't need to become anyone's mirror to be seen. He smiled. "That's very you." I laughed. "I guess it is." A few weeks later, I received one last update about Nicholas. It came from Tom again, almost in passing during a business event. "Remember your ex?" he asked casually. I nodded. He moved out of state, got a low-level marketing job somewhere small. Seems like he's keeping his head down. Guess he's rebuilding in his way. I smiled faintly. "Good. I hope he does." And I meant it. Not out of forgiveness, but out of freedom. His story was no longer mine to carry. That night, I stood on my apartment balcony looking over the city skyline. The same skyline that once witnessed my heartbreak now glittered like quiet applause. I pulled my journal from the small table beside me and wrote the final entry in a chapter I hadn't realized was closing. He chased better. I became it. I thought I'd lost everything when he left. But all I lost was the version of me who believed love meant losing myself. Now I know better. I closed the journal, placed it aside, and turned off my phone. The city lights shimmered in the distance, not a reminder of what I'd endured, but of everything I'd become. And somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear my younger self whispering back, "You made it." I smiled at the thought, then whispered the line I'd written 100 times, but never said aloud. He chased better. I became it.